Yeah. Okay, so I like to start by responding to the two curiosities PJ put up. PJ says, what is Gestalt Africa and what is this program? And I would like to speak to both. Gestalt Africa, as we have said, is a platform. It's a platform that has been created by a number of us for the purpose of profiling and providing space for the articulation of African perspectives on leadership from a Gestalt approach. So this platform is available for anyone with an African orientation, whether the person is an African or of an African descent or associated with Africa or works with Africans in whichever configuration. This platform provides the space for people to bring their programs, their perspective and experiences to share with all practitioners in the area of organization and leadership. And so it's a platform that is hosted by a collection of us, and we have some ways of enabling everyone who likes to come onto this platform to share knowledge, to share experience of the application of organization development, coaching, team leadership, etc., from an African perspective. So that is the essence of the platform. Now, on this platform, as Michael mentioned in his intro, we do a lot of offerings. We have a number of programs and workshops and courses we have piloted with in the past almost 3 years. So we have the Introduction to Gestalt, which is an online 2-day. We have the Committee of Practice, a gathering of practitioners to share their experiences and to cross-fertilize each other's learning. We have done some other programs like Resistances to Change or facilitation from a Gestalt perspective and other such offerings. We have even had opportunity to introduce topics relating to what is the stance of Gestalt from an African perspective. So that's what this platform is about. Anyone with an orientation to an African perspective on coaching, on team development, on organization, on leadership is welcome to deliver their programs on this platform. And as part of the offerings of the Gestalt Africa platform is our flagship program called the Gestalt African Leadership Programme, a 12-month program with 3 in-person sessions and 4 online sessions, making a total of 7 modules over a 12-month period. And I'll speak a little bit about that because as the flagship program, the Gestalt Africa Leadership Programme sort of embodies and defines the uniqueness of what we are offering on the Gestalt Africa platform. So as if you like, metaphorically, the mother hen of the Gestalt Africa is this program. There are a few things I like to submit, then I'll maybe stop and take some questions or clarifications about Gestalt Africa and specifically the Gestalt Africa Leadership Programme. The essence of what we are providing and how different it is from others that exist elsewhere is that the Gestalt Africa Leadership Programme will be presenting the nexus, the interface between Gestalt theory, concept models, and its Gestalt leadership approaches, and the African ways of being and organizing. In other words, Africans and people of African descent have a unique way of being and of organizing. And these unique ways of being and organizing, we have done some work to underscore the similarities and the alignment with Gestalt approaches. And so I need to say that when I went into Gestalt training way back in 92, 95, it became obvious to me that what I was learning in terms of theory, concept, models in Gestalt were giving names to things that I grew up with, that I live, that I do normally. And I found that many other Africans have the same orientation. So Gestalt Africa has this uniqueness. It is located at the nexus, the interface between Gestalt theory, models and concepts, and African ways of being and organizing. That is what is unique. So everything we do has strands at that nexus. And if you like, take the main river, the metaphor we have been using, is this Gestalt Africa, and it's fed by a number of tributaries. One of the things that the Gestalt Africa Leadership Programme seeks to highlight is that Gestalt is a needs fulfillment model. And it's a human needs fulfillment model. Therefore, how do Africans go about to define their needs and to go about organizing to fulfill them? How different or similar are they to other people's way of expressing their needs and organizing to meet those needs? Will be one of the focal areas of the Gestalt Africa leadership. To underscore some of these, we all recognize that the particular aspect of African people and people of African descent, there's something particular about their identities, and that trauma is almost, a defining factor. Almost every African or people of African descent can define their identity through some trauma. Trauma through slavery, colonization, trauma through oppression, trauma through neglect, trauma through poverty, whatever traumas is one of the defining elements. We will take time in Gestalt Africa to underscore what does this mean in terms of who we are, how we organize ourselves in order to get our needs met. There's another dimension of the Gestalt Africa Leadership Programme is the management of the dynamics between the I and the we, the individualism and the collectivism, because most African societies and African people have an identity that is a group identity. And Gestalt does not necessarily give much emphasis to this, though it recognizes the we and the I and the they dimensions. The Gestalt African Leadership Programme seeks to underscore the creative dynamic between the individualism and collectivism for the purpose of being and organizing to have needs met. Maybe I can excite you about that. That for me, growing up in a typical rural African setting, and most people never asked for my name. They asked which house I come from, which family are you coming from? And sometimes they say, whose child are you? As if I didn't exist by myself because I belonged to a family. And this dynamic defines you and helps us to meet our needs in different ways than other people's might. We want to explore this dynamic and how it enables us, so that in most corporate systems where Africans and people of African descent function, there's an unconscious leaning to the we, and this idea of the individual excellence sometimes is a challenge because of the shame attached to being standing out too much as an identity of your own. So we will explore what does this mean in the way we are and the way we organize. Another aspect of Gestalt Africa Leadership Programme is how to handle the phenomenon of hierarchy, power, and leadership, dominance, oppression, and at the same time, how does this speak to collective decision-making, collective ownership? And that is interesting because whereas there is the chieftaincy and the family head and all that phenomenon, predominantly, most of the things that are done in the collective environment of Africa are through participatory, consultative, consensus building. Another interesting thing Gestalt Africa brings is the female leadership, as an African phenomenon. Because I know in many African societies, there are women chiefs, women traditional leaders, women traditional healers. And therefore, in terms of being and organizing and leading, from an African perspective, we need to embrace this phenomenon. There is the interesting part for me, particularly, about Gestalt Africa Leadership Programme is the African concept of awareness, which goes beyond body, mind, and heart to include spiritual and sometimes some other, if you like, transcendent awareness. And the whole idea of somatic embodiment of knowledge. People are aware of things they cannot explain, but it's true. How do we deal with it? We give it the name intuition and minimize its value. But in the African context, there's nothing like intuition. It's all knowing. It's all awareness. And therefore, how do we enable African people to own and to utilize these other ways of being aware? I have three more to say about the offerings in Gestalt Africa Leadership, that the entire leadership model of Africa, I often say before the white man came, settles around the issue of appreciative inquiry, or the whole idea why traditional African society didn't have prisons was that every member belonged, and we found a way appreciatively of supporting and enabling everyone to belong. Therefore, the power of the patio before the sunrise. Therefore, the learning circle, which is so akin to Gestalt, sitting in circles and in total community gathering, is a very African phenomenon, where everyone has the opportunity to speak. I mean, growing up, I experienced the town drunk and the discard of society, if you like, in some other terms, speaking to the chief of the community in the palace when the time arose, so that the chief's power became at par with the town drunk, because there is the appreciative inquiry. That's the community. How do we use this so that this whole idea of democracy and the silent voice, which has become a phenomenon that has been commercialized, actually existed long ago in the African society, that equality of voices and of gender and of status was part of it, and did not undermine hierarchy, but was utilized as part of getting things done. The two other things I like to say, which means diversity, equity, and inclusion has been an integral part of African ways of being and organizing long before it became industrialized. And we need to revisit where is it in Africa, and how do we benefit from the global reality of DEI. Levels of system, I think I've spoken about it, that our perception of goes beyond the corporate levels of system to include the family, the tribe, and everyone located within it. For us, therefore, in Gestalt Africa Leadership, learning is a community process. It's a communal engagement. And we do this naturally. And we want to use Gestalt Africa Leadership to highlight what this means and how we organize within the context of the global. The last one I like to say is that African organizing frame include music, folklore, dance, and art form, including the spiritual practices as ways of being and organizing. And when I look today into the technological advancement, especially with artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and all the things that are coming on, the issue is in leading in Africa, fake news and misrepresentation of others' views or personality was deeply frowned upon. And we had mechanisms in the African ways of organizing to deal with those in ways that you could be so intelligent and rich, and yet you were not accepted by society. So we would like to draw home these peculiar nuances of African ways of being and organizing at the interface, at the nexus with Gestalt theory, concepts, and models, so that awareness or the cycle of experience, for instance, or the unit of work has always been that we sent you to do something. How did you go about doing it? We're sometimes more interested in your messaging than the content of the message. So that in many African societies, the differentiation between the messenger and the message did not exist. The messenger was the message. And how do we then lead, given this kind of context? So I like to stop here because if you allow me, I could carry on. I'm very excited about what Gestalt Africa Leadership would offer at the nexus between African ways of being and organizing and the Gestalt theories, concepts, and practices that I have lived with in the past almost 30 years. And I'm so excited to be part of this offering because I enjoy seeing the application, the nuances of the Africanness in the Gestalt ways of doing things. Let me stop here and receive some comments, clarifications, or questions at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Let me hold the space for the questions and also welcome Aso, Lehau, and Therese. You most welcome. So let's see if there are any questions for John around what he's just said. Keith, do you want to get us started?
I do. I'm curious about the notion of Africa. If there are 54 countries in Africa, then the Gestalt Africa conversation is actually a much broader, or it can be a deconstructed conversation, because there are 54 or perhaps a couple more, 50-something countries in Africa. And so how will you address that distinction between Africa, which is of course a continent, versus 54 different cultures and different countries?
Very great question, Keith, because part of what we have been talking about as the initiators of Gestalt Africa is that Africa today is not only Black people. We have white Africans, we have Indian Africans, we have Caucasian Africans, we have Arab Africans. So Africa today is actually, if you like, multicultural, multiracial in that sense. And yet, there's something uniquely definable about all of these people who have African origins or belong to the continent, in the sense that you can trace through all of them elements of identity linked to trauma. You can trace through all of them the issue of collectivism and individualism. You can trace through all of them the idea of appreciation coming before criticism, of hierarchy that is an abuse of power rather than in service. So it's common across the continent, and the 54 countries actually is part of the historical trauma that this continent has suffered. We didn't exist as 54 countries. Exactly. This was imposed upon us, and this has been one of the defining elements why Gestalt Africa and Gestalt Africa leadership is critical at this moment as we redefine Africa from a global perspective. I hope I responded, Keith.
Yes.
55, we have been corrected by Victoria. Yeah. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you. Thanks, Keith. I saw you had your hand up as well, Dumi.
Yes, I did. I love this. This is It's amazing. I love your positioning, understanding who is African today. And I want to broaden it up a little bit, John, and pose a provocative statement that everyone is African, because Africa is home to humanity. So it's what we call African now is more like the way of being and way of showing up that identifies more with what is African ways of being. So I love your positioning of the individual, the I and the we, and the rest of it, the individual and collective, which is predominant, almost pristine in African communities that many of us grew up in. So I love that, because it's the way of being that identifies with African. Because if everywhere where people have dug up to say human beings, where they're coming from, you find that essentially we all come back from here. Yeah, I always call it Africa is paradise. We didn't just, that's the Garden of Eden is Africa. So yeah, whichever angle you take it, Reverend Kum, it home. But having said that, I would like to hear your reflections on wholesomeness.
Yeah.
Break down wholesomeness, how to be a whole human being, reflections on that. Because that intersection you're talking to is so beautiful, the way you put it.
Thank you, Dumi. Thank you very much, because that's one point. I just put my finger on it. I skipped it. Yes. One of the offerings in Gestalt Africa Leadership is to explore the African concept of wholeness that includes brokenness, which is very different from other people's way of defining wholeness. And that wholeness for an African leader or an African person it includes the brokenness. That's why our society didn't have prisons. So brokenness is part of wholeness in the sense that we accept all of who we are, which is very Gestalt. Every individual subjective reality is valid. Isn't that a Gestalt theory and concept? That's an African sense of wholeness. The individual subjective reality is valid. And we begin relating from everyone is whole, including their brokenness. That's why the village drunk can speak to the chief of the community and be accepted. So this idea of your personal worth is in dollar terms, did not exist and does still not exist with us. We need to find out how we value people for who they are, not what they have. And that's part of the leadership, dynamic in the African context. I think there's somebody who has posted something on the chat. Victoria, yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's just an apology. So, Dumi, I hope I picked up on that. Yeah. So yes, this Gestalt Africa Leadership Program will cover these dimensions and even some more that I haven't named, because in 10, 15 minutes, I will not be able to do justice to a program of 12 months. That will be, but the whole idea of Ubuntu, you are because I am. Let me even say, when I started traveling outside Ghana into Germany and other places, and I would greet people in the street, they looked at me as if I was crazy or I wanted something. It's normal for us to relate. We are very relational. And everything I am or do is based on relationship, not on my knowledge. And this is African ways of leading. So we will explore this in the program. Thank you.
John, before you go, can you just talk a little bit more about leadership? Because we've spoken a lot about Gestalt and the African kind of sensitivity and framing, and this kind of sort of posture of almost Afro-presentism for Afro-futurism based on Afro-history. Yes. And we all find ourselves here. But the other the nexus, as you speak about, is this thing of leadership and the kind of challenge of leadership on the continent. So like, if I'm a leader in an organization or a corporate or a government department, what am I going to get?
Yeah.
You're going to teach.
That's a good one. I think I'll respond with a very short anecdote. Long ago, actually not that long ago, less than 10 years ago, I happened to be among a group of people who met one of Ghana's presidents while he was in office. And as we spoke with him and engaged with him, I raised my hand and said, "Sir, can I make a submission?" And I said, "I know, sir, you come from a royal lineage, but in this role, you are an elected president and you are not a monarch. So leadership in Africa traditionally was monarch, where people served the king. And yet in that role was the king's vulnerability, because even the youngest man or woman in town could dethrone or distew the chief by removing his sandals or saying something, filthy to him or about him in public. You lost your throne. So that elevated thing was sitting on a very vulnerable role of relational acceptability. So if you were relationally not accepted, you didn't have a position. So unlike elected president who then comes into power and has 4 years on or 5 years undisputed opportunity, and the only way you get rid of him is through some street protests or caucus to drive him out. And we see people bringing this whole concept into corporate. That's why I was laughing very early in my professional life when I hear titles like chief director in the corporate. You see the merger of the chief and the director. So we carry it with us unconscious. And I think leadership, what we are offering, is to not to disown any, but to make people aware of the choices you are making in the range that is available for you. So that's my anecdotal response to your question. The Gestalt African leadership like to submit that in our world today, from an African perspective, located within the global reality, leadership has moved away from the one everyone follows to the one who facilitates the bringing together of competences of the people for a common agenda. So the leader is no more the one in lead, but the one in facilitation, the catalyst, the alchemist who brings everybody's best out for a common agenda. Is the new leader we want to group. And this was the situation which I grew up in, where the traditional leader was holding power for and on behalf of the community and would hold it gingerly, because the youngest person in town meeting the chief or the queen mother in public and have a legitimate reason to speak foul against him or her, that person lost their throne. So we want to come to a place where, unlike many corporate systems where the CEO's agenda and vision is what we all work towards, that agenda and vision and what we work is a collectively owned reality. That's the CEO facilitates for and on our behalf. That's the paradigm that we want to present in Gestalt leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So for those of you that want to hear more, you're going to have to wait a little bit because once John gets going, it's difficult to stop listening to him. I know it's difficult for him to stop talking, but it's difficult to stop listening. But for those of you that are interested, Chantel Wiley, who is unable to be with us tonight, who's a core part of Gestalt Africa, John and Chantel facilitated SA Rugby's strategy to win the World Cup.
Yeah.
So the kind of principles we're talking about have applicability in the sports world. I'll also say, for those of you that know South Africa, is that John has also facilitated in Tugela Ferry in Msinga in KZN, and also in northern Nigeria between intergenerational warring factions and brought peace. Yeah. So these principles have application and enormous power. And this approach that we are offering is acutely sensitive to the challenges of leadership on our continent. We do believe in the continent, and we do believe in the growth of leadership on this continent and what it can offer. We're going to change gear a bit and go into a little bit more detail, and I'm going to invite Mike to just take us through. So John's given us this overall frame and some approaches. What does this mean in terms of the 7 modules, and what is the kind of learning journey of the Gestalt Africa Leadership Programme?
Thanks, Jim. I'm afraid I'm going to be that guy who interrupts our lovely connection with slides. But here we go. I want to show you a picture. Let's put this in slideshow. Okay. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview of what does this program, our leadership program, entail. I think most of you know that it is a 12-month program. It's broken into 7 modules. Some of them are online, some of them are in person, some of them are coaching engagements, and let's talk a little bit through those. Those of you who are familiar with Gestalt and the way we work, we pay attention to beginning, middle, and end of everything we do. And so in our work as in our course design. So the beginning part of our course, which will encompass the first 3 modules, is all about agency, personal agency, and building ourselves, developing this tool of us that we will be using as leaders. The middle part of our work, which will be module 4 to 6, is all about action. How do we use ourselves? How do we take ourselves out into the world, into our organizations, into our societies, wherever we are wanting to have impact, and be able to bring about change or influence, or whatever the intention is that we have. And then lastly, we'll look at impact at the end, this ending piece, closure, really wrapping things up and making sure that we are able to leave the program equipped to go back into the world, into our organizations, and make a difference. So the course will run from a few months' time in October to October next year. And in this picture here, the green modules, 1, 4, and 7 are residential models. They're in person. So they will be 6-day modules. The first one is in Accra, in Ghana. The module 4 will be in Cape Town, and module 7 in Mombasa. And just so that you're aware, on module 7, there is still a little bit of negotiation going on behind the scenes around whether module 7 is going to be in Mombasa or in Zanzibar. So if you are very excited about the prospect of coming to Zanzibar, then I suggest you sign up to the course very quickly, and everybody who's paid their registration fee gets to give a vote on where we go, something like that. So module 7 is still a little bit, we're not super clear on which venue, but it certainly will be in East Africa. These residential modules, you would have heard John say already this evening, that we're talking about the importance of relational. Gestalt is a relational model, and if you come on the course, you'll hear that a lot. The Gestalt is a relational model, and leadership is essentially a relational task. The residential models are really important to connect, to build the group, to develop the relationships that last through the course. What else do I want to say about that? We do focus a lot of what we do in Gestalt is around building the community. We use the community of the participants as the learning ground. It gives us the opportunity to discover about ourselves, about others, about the boundary between ourselves and others, how we show up in different types of groups. We really do bring a magnifying glass to the dynamics going on in the room. So these residential models are kind of the anchor for the 12 months. In between the residential models, we will have online sessions. So module 2, 3, 5, and 6, the blue modules, are online. The eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that there are 4 dates above each of these online courses. The online modules will be 2 days. The 2 days before that, we have separated out, as that is when there will be application group work. So we will be forming subgroups of participants, and you'll be getting to do work at different levels with your subgroups. So in the 2 days prior to the online sessions, that's when those groups will meet. They'll be self-organized, and so I think it might help to see these online sessions as kind of sort of bookmark a week, 4 days for those sessions, because there's quite a lot that happens. In June and July, excuse me, between module 5 and 6, that's when there will be the individual coaching sessions. So each participant will be assigned a coach. There'll be 3 sessions per participant, and those sessions will pick up on work that's happening in the room, that's happening in the sessions, the development areas of interest, any support that you might need, and we give targeted and focused coaching, one-on-one coaching during those times. Obviously, it'll be online for people that aren't together, but if participants happen to be in the same place as faculty, then those sessions can take place in person. Good. And then you'll see the little 25 in the yellow block here on the right-hand side. The total number of days is 25 learning days over the 12 months. Okay. I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly because John has spoken to it, but what you'll get out of the program, you'll see lots of this in the flyer, so it probably won't be new to you, but just to emphasize a few points. There is a lot about knowing yourself better. There's a lot about self-awareness and self-development. We do get some participants asking us, what's the line between personal development and professional development? How much is this about me, and how much is this about my leadership, my profession showing up in an organization? And the answer is it's both. We can't develop as leaders without developing as individuals. So there is a lot of work on ourselves. There's a lot of time, a lot of focus, a lot of energy and attention given to developing our own awareness of ourselves, how we are, how we show up with others, and our drivers, our motivation, our behavior, and normally there are a few surprises in that process. Awareness is a fundamental principle of Gestalt. We do a huge amount of our work is simply raising awareness and seeing what happens with that new awareness. You've heard John talk about wholeness. Really, one of the interpretations of the German word Gestalt is whole. So we do focus on creating an environment where people can accept all of themselves rather than just the parts that they like. So setting up that environment, setting up the right feel, the right learning space where people can look at the parts of themselves, the parts of others, the parts of an engagement that might not be as they expected. That's an important part of what we're doing. We obviously spend a lot of time on the intellectual stuff, the theories, the models, the concepts. These are the head dominant people will find comfort in these areas. This is the stuff that's supported by the books and so on. We don't just want to stay up here. That wouldn't help us be whole. So there is a lot of time that we dedicate to doing things, to practicing, to experimenting, to trying things out, to learning through the process of doing, which is obviously tied into the learning styles, individual learning styles that we bring into this. And developing community is, as I spoke about earlier, that's a really important part of what we're doing. Somebody, I think it was Keith in the introduction, spoke to iGold, which is a course run by a sort of sister organization, or maybe a brother organization of ours. I'm not sure which gender it is. I did that iGold course almost 10 years ago now, and I'm still in contact with some of the people that I was on that course with. So developing this community and the long-lasting relationships that come out of this are really invaluable for personal growth, as well as for professional development. We still have communities of practice where we get together and talk about what went on. And this is from a course we did in 2014. This is the last text-heavy slide. Sorry about this. Complexity. The world is complex. We've been dealing with this complex question of what does it mean to be African? I'm very obviously white. I am in Cape Town. A few generations ago, I would have come, I think, from Scotland. Am I African? These are complex questions that we've engaged with. And that is one of the things that we hope to bring, to introduce into leaders in Africa, the ability to not take the simple answer, not take the easy answer, but sit with the complexity, sit with the ambivalence, sit with the unknown, and be able to work with these very complex issues and complex questions in a more sophisticated way. And lastly, as John has said, dealt with in quite a lot of detail, this Afrocentric. What does Africa have to teach the world about leadership? How can an Afrocentric approach inform the international practice of Gestalt? We'll have a number of people from outside of the African continent coming to join us. And we're hoping that they can learn from what happens here and take that back to where they work and where they're from, to enrich in the body of knowledge that is Gestalt. So what will all this goodness cost? The investment, as we like to talk about it. Hopefully everybody's seen this in the flyer, so there shouldn't be too many surprises here. We have differential pricing for local, and by local we mean African and international participants. I think it does say this on the flyer, but in case people aren't clear, the additional amount that international participants will pay, all of that money is used to fund bursaries for local for local participants. So that's the tuition fee. If you shop around for some of the international programs, I think you'll find it's really competitively priced. It's less than half the price of some of these other big Gestalt programs. We have tried really hard to keep the costing as low as possible. It is an expensive thing to run. It's a complex thing to run. There are a number of us. There will be 6 faculty involved in this. But we have tried to keep the costs as low as possible. Please be aware that the tuition fee is not the only cost that you will incur for the program. There's also the cost of the residential modules. So there'll be flights, accommodation, and conference and meals costs for each of the residential modules. I've given indicative costs here. So flights. It depends where you're flying from, really. I think that's fairly obvious. I put that $700 as a kind of rough price for those of you in South Africa. That's a Joburg to Accra flight. It's around $700. The accommodation is for sharing or for single. If anybody's got more questions about where we'll be staying in Accra, Kamal will be able to fill us in on that in a little bit. And then the conferencing and meals is the additional fee that we pay for the conference facilities at the hotel. The pricing is a little bit lower for Cape Town, and it's to be confirmed for the final module, but that gives you a rough ballpark of where we fit in. Okay,